Hey guys, welcome back to Inventing a Better You. My name is Valentin, and in today's video, we're going to do a continuation of the business cycle or the economical cycle, which I've previously discussed on the channel. Now, for those who did not watch the other video, there are four stages to the economical cycle, and those are the recovery, peak, contraction, and trough. Now, you should know exactly when each one of these phases starts, what happens during these phases, and this way you can safeguard your investments and you can maximize your profits. So in this particular instance, I'm going to focus on the key elements that signal the beginning of each one of these phases so that you can proactively make the right decisions and avoid any surprises. Let's get in the video. All right, so what are the leading indicators of the economical cycle? Well, I put together a diagram. This is a slightly adjusted diagram from the previous video, which shows the economical cycle, as well as which industries perform best during the different stages. Now, I'm going to start with the left side here and just quickly go through it. So we have in blue, basically we have the bull market being represented. So that means when there's a lot of buying and then there's an increase in basically the stock price of all these different sectors. So at the bottom, we have the early bull market, which is basically sort of the beginning of the recovery phase. And this is usually following by the end of a trough phase. So we have 8 and 4, which are the financials and transportation. So these are the best sectors that you want to purchase at the beginning of this recovery phase. Now in the middle bull market, there's 5 and 7. So that's technology and capital goods. These tend to do better, and they continue to do better all the way into the peak phase of the recovery phase. Now at the top, in the late bull market, we have 6, 11, and 9. That's basic industry, precious metals, and energy. Okay, so this is just kind of historically what are the sectors that did well in the different stages of the recovery phase. And as you approach the peak, the best sectors are the consumer non-cyclicals. So these are things that don't change as a matter of the business cycle phases. So basically like energy, utilities, that's the examples of the consumer non-cyclicals. And number 3 is healthcare. So once the peak is reached and we're moving into the contraction phase, we can see the early bear, middle bear, and late bear stages. So in the early to mid, number 10, which are the utilities, are best performing. And then in the late recession stages, financials and consumer cyclicals are the better industries. So this hopefully gives you kind of like a general image of how stocks or how the stock market is related to the economical cycles, how it's impacted. All right, so let's get into it. So what happens during the expansion phase? What are some of the critical points that you can identify that you are currently in an expansion or an expansion is initiating? The first is an increase in the positive economic indicators like employment, income, output, wages, profits, demand and supply of goods and services. Typically, governments measure the different phases of the economical cycle using the GDP, the gross domestic product. And in this case, the GDP, a rate of 2 to 3% is typical of the expansion phase. Now, unemployment reaches a rate of about 3.5 to 4.5%, which is very low for this stage. And inflation is also low at 2%. Now, the governments can control the length of each phase of the business cycle by doing 2 major things. One is to increase or decrease the spending or investment on infrastructure. And basically this adds or subtracts the value of GDP over time. And that's also known as fiscal policy. Or they can encourage changes in interest rates to Bank of Canada, in the case of Canada, or another central bank, depending on where you live. And this would affect the individual and business spending and investments. And the name of this sort of policy is a monetary policy. So by kind of mix matching and alternating both the fiscal and the monetary policies, they can control sort of the length of each phase of the business cycle, more or less. All right, so what happens during the peak? Well, the economic indicators do not grow further and they're at their highest. prices are at the very top, and this stage marks the reversal point in the trend of the economic growth. So ideally, you want to be able to kind of get a sense of historically what the GDP is that matches a peak, and in this case, any sort of growth higher than 3% matches the peak, and inflation greater than 2% and maybe reaching double digits. So when you get closer to higher numbers, then you're thinking maybe it's time that a reversal may occur, so I should get ready. So these are the two main things, the GDP and the inflation rate, that you should watch out for. So once we reach the peak and reversal occurs, we enter the contraction phase, and that's what we're seeing. The demand of goods and services starts declining rapidly and steadily during this phase. So prices tend to fall, and all the positive economic indicators, like I mentioned before, income, output, wages, etc., consequently start to fall as well. In terms of GDP, GDP is below 2%, and when it turns negative, that's when the economists call it a recession. Another major thing to watch out for is mass layoffs, and that typically makes the news during this phase. And of course, last but not least, the unemployment rates also begin to rise during contraction, and at least in the beginning phase. Now, what are some key factors to signal the recession? So once you enter the contraction, the later steps of contraction is the recession. So I put together 4 factors to watch out for. Number 1 is the decline in the S&P 500. For those who don't know, this is an index which is a reflective of the top 500 largest publicly traded stocks in the United States. So when you see the S&P 500 dropping continuously, that basically can signal that you're definitely in a contraction towards recession if it's not recovering. The second is a rapid increase in unemployment rate. So during contraction, you have an increase in unemployment, but this is a rapid and continuous increase that you're seeing. Another one is a decline in the consumer confidence index. So basically for this index, a rating higher than 100 means people plan to spend money, while a rating lower than 100 indicates that people are more likely to add to their savings and hold off from throwing their money away. And last but not least, if new construction developments slow down or existing home prices plateau, that's also a sign of possible recession. All right, so hopefully these factors could be useful for you to identify this major turning point in the economical cycle. And once you've hit the recession and you're coming to the very bottom, what is the very trough, basically you're in this depression stage where the economy growth rate becomes negative. And at this point, demand and supply of goods and services reach their lowest point. Now, in the USA, the National Bureau of Economic Research determines the business cycle stages, and they use quarterly GDP growth rates to identify that. It also uses monthly economic indicators such as employment, real personal income, industrial production, retail sales. I've included this information here just so you can have an idea where you can go check like what phase you're in and what the GDP situation is for those who are curious. In Canada, Statistics Canada is practically responsible for the same type of information. I'm not sure if they have a website that has this readily available. You have to put a request for it, but I figured these were important sources for you to check out. And with that being said, we're at the end of the video. I hope the factors discussed here can help you make the right determinations with your portfolio as to whether you should hold on, sell, or which type of sectors are best for you to invest in during each one of the stages of the economical cycle. All right, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Ciao.